Choices. We all make them. The choice now is to be a sustainable business or no business. This is the generational challenge of our time. Together we can reimagine a world where profit comes not just in spite of our sustainable practices, but because of them. A world where we put the eco in economics. When you can reclaim material headed for a landfill and create designer sneakers, that's supply chain economics. When you can get circular and provide reusable packaging on shampoo at a low price, that's consumer economics. When you create inclusive and sustainable workplaces by offering employees flexibility, support, and community wherever they are, that's human economics. SAP has the people, technologies, and processes to put it all together across all operations and industries, building a better profit and planet. But we can't do it alone. The only way forward is together. It's a sustainable future. It's a profitable future. It's our future.
Have a chance to share all that we've learned over the years. So we're going to talk today about some ideas around how organizations can implement a data and analytics strategy that is connected tightly to business outcomes and allows the organization to scale and be agile in a way that continuously delivers value. I'm going to go into the framework at a high level, but I want to offer up to you an opportunity to go even deeper through a masterclass and tools that we've made available online and to the attendees. So I have these USB sticks up here that offer the masterclass in a lot more detail of content, as well as a playbook that contains different examples of how the framework has been put into action with our customers. So please take one of those at the end in order to get even more insight and information. So, and I'm also not going to talk too much in depth about technology or one particular capability. The idea is to give you an overview of the framework, and then I'm happy to answer questions, as Maria said, towards the end. So why do organizations today need to think about data and analytics from a point of view of being agile and being modern? That's what we say. And what I get the sense of when I talk to customers is that they see the topic of data and the topic of generating insights and analytics as an aspiration. They want to get there, right? They want to be able to be more data-driven. But in reality, many find that it's too complicated. They don't know how and where to get started. They get tied up in the technology and an infrastructure that has perhaps multiple data platforms, disconnected data sets, redundancies, particularly around the reporting space. And so it becomes this challenge of being able to understand how to have the trust and feel confident that the data and the analytics that are needed by the business can be useful, can be fit for the business purpose. And so we get and see the statistics here that companies are not being as insight-driven as they would like to. There's not as tight an alignment between business and IT as we'd like to see. And it's just becoming, I think, a bit overwhelming. And so the answer to that, from our point of view, is to have a strategy, to have a plan. And at SAP, we believe that a successful data and analytics strategy is tightly connected to business outcomes. It's at the core of the strategy and the plan. And so the key is to understand what are the business challenges, to be tightly aligned to the business across the enterprise, and to build an action plan and a strategy that addresses those challenges. So today I'm going to share a very pragmatic approach that SAP has developed from working with our customers. At the heart of it is the data as an innovation enabler, and at the heart of it is business outcomes, and being able to make those connections between the activities and the capabilities that we deliver through data and analytics that deliver value back to the business and insight. I think about data as data leaders as problem solvers, and that data is a real opportunity to foster and accelerate a transformation within an organization. So I want you to think about data as not a technique or a program that would hinder a data process, but that could accelerate it, that could add additional value. And it's about the way in which we articulate the capabilities that are needed for data and analytics, and it's about aligning with the various stakeholders. And I'll cover quite a lot of that today as we go through the framework. So why Agile? Why did we title this, this session about being agile and having the business agility around a data and analytics strategy? So I think perhaps we can all agree that in the world we're in today, that today's organizations have to be able to adapt to changes that are happening around and within their ecosystems, that we are faced with instabilities and uncertainties around political climates, around inflation from a global scale, around kind of new challenges around sustainability and climate change. And for organizations today to be able to thrive and survive, they need to adapt. They need to be able to shift and pivot, to be able to change their ways of working to address these challenges head on. And to survive and thrive requires the ability and the capabilities for being adaptable. And I see this not just with companies that I work with in Europe, but certainly it's a bit of a global phenomenon now, that we see that companies are completely transforming themselves. And I don't mean on the technical side, like moving to the cloud is a way to transform, but I see it more in the overarching strategy. And I'll share a story that I work with a company in Brussels who's in the public sector. They're a utilities company. And they've asked for our help in transforming their organization to be more consumer-centric, more kind of citizen-centric, which is a completely new paradigm for them. They don't know how to approach it. They just know that they want to be able to add more value to their citizens. They want to get to know them better. They want to understand their buying patterns and habits. They want to be able to upsell and cross-sell to them, just like a more traditional industry would. And so when they've created this transformation initiative, it's caused their data leader to think about and rethink how are they going to address this new data product, this consumer data product that's completely foreign to them. Do they have access to those consumer data sets? Should they have access to those consumer data sets given the privacy and security and regulatory constraints? Where do they put that data? Right? Do they have the right technical infrastructure? Do they have the right systems to be able to store and manage? What are the insights that they're looking to get from a business perspective? So all of these questions that are generated from the overarching business strategy have a direct impact to their data and analytics strategy. And so their data leader needs to shift and change accordingly. And I believe that every strategy that we have now that is going through a change, that the data and analytics component needs to change accordingly, that we also need to be able to pivot and shift and adjust to meet the business challenges. I'll share another story that just happened this afternoon. I was sitting out having lunch, and an executive from the UMG, which is a music group, an online music provider, who just came up to me and said, "Hey, do you guys offer anything for consumer data management? We're trying to get closer to our listeners." I thought, that's interesting. He said, historically, their organization's been focused on music artists. But now they're kind of moving from a B2B to a B2C strategy. And so he's really looking to understand what are the new capabilities that he and his organization need to be able to support this new data product of listeners. And how does he do that? And what are the kinds of changes that are going to be needed for him to be successful in his role in data management, to be able to adapt to a new environment with listeners? And so I do believe that there's a lot of these opportunities for us as data leaders to be more adaptable, to be able to address changes and support these big transformation initiatives that our organizations are going through. And I see that today's data leader is really this problem solver, and that we have a significant opportunity to drive change within the organization, that we can step up to the challenges and offer ideas and innovation and education on how data can be a significant enabler to the transformation, that we have a right and a seat at the table when executives are talking about what their strategies are for the future, what their 5-year plan is, what's the transformation agenda. We have a role to play as an enabler. We have a role to play as a key partner. And as well, I think that there are also kind of future thinking topics like sustainability. One of my favorites, and one of Maria's favorites too, is that I believe that even this larger business-centric topics like sustainability has a significant role for a data leader and for a data program to add value. So we can be an agent of change. We should absolutely be an agent of change. We need to do that through involvement of all the stakeholders in the organization. We need to keep an ear out for the buzz that's happening in the organization as they think about what's coming next. And we need to think about, from a data and analytics program, how we can empower those stakeholders, how we can add value and drive their business outcomes. And as well, think about it from the lens of having an immediate impact. So not necessarily being the slow engine or the slow train, but being able to accelerate and add additional value to the strategies. So we at SAP have created a simplified 3-step approach or a framework to help companies that we work with to accelerate insight to value by having an agile data and analytics strategy. I think we've built this over the work that we've done with customers across various industries, and even frankly across various different approaches. So whether your data and analytics program is a more modern decentralized data mesh approach or a traditional centralized data program, doesn't matter. You still need a strategy. You still need to get stakeholder buy-in, and these steps apply and can be consumed and used by your organization. Either you're creating a data strategy from the onset, or that you have a data strategy that needs to be revised and adapted as your business has changed. Either way, this framework applies. And we've created accelerators and business contexts that help our customers move through this strategy and ultimately create a fast path action plan for them to show and demonstrate immediate value and business impact. That's what it's all about. So this is all grounded in understanding and aligning with business objectives, with gaining business buy-in and support, and formulating in a way that will resonate with the business, particularly all the stakeholders. I think sometimes we and data leaders have a tendency to stay close to those who have been supporting our work. Many times that's an operational leader or someone in a part of the organization who believes in what we do and we've added value. This is a chance perhaps to think outside that box and to begin to engage with stakeholders who we may not come across on a regular basis, but may have a real interest and need in accelerating their programs with data and analytics capabilities. And so the first step here in the framework is pretty traditional around discovery and prioritization. I think, as I mentioned, the idea is to extend and expand the discovery process to new stakeholders. We call them, in this methodology, business champions. I really like the word champion because it articulates not just a one-time conversation or exercise to uncover and discover their challenges, but begins to articulate more of a relationship that's a longer term relationship, that's someone who will ultimately be a champion and be willing to actively sponsor and support the work that needs to be done. And I think that in the discovery phase, identifying those champions early on is important, and perhaps might be something that is new and innovative in terms of the kinds of conversations that you can have with those champions, with the business stakeholders, and being a bit more provocative in understanding and listening to their challenges, their business desires, their expectations, and their outcomes. But I would think that at the very first step, the most important key here is around prioritization. In fact, I might even say that the most important is deprioritization, because I find that often when we have conversations with various stakeholders around understanding their data and analytics needs, or really just understanding their business needs and their opportunities and their desires to transform, the conversation can end up with, a huge list of wants, needs, desires. And so the intention is to focus and identify those opportunities that are going to generate the most value and start with those. So asking questions around, what are the business expectations? How are you going to measure success? How does this work tie back to a larger business strategy, the outcomes, the expectations of the senior executives? What's the overarching business strategy, and how does your particular area of focus impact that overall business strategy? And so this very step is very important in terms of prioritization, engaging with the right stakeholders, defining and having conversations with the right champions who are going to be able to have short-term influence in the outcomes to the action plan, but really longer-term relationship within the family of data and analytics supporters. And then the second phase is more about identifying patterns of insight. We call that pattern assignment, where you begin to understand what the business expectations are for generating insights from data, and then mapping and identifying levels of maturity around data management capabilities. I'll talk about the capabilities in a bit more detail, but the intention is to understand if these are the business priorities and the desired business outcomes, how do we map that to our abilities and capabilities today in terms of the patterns that they're looking for generating insights and the traditional data management capabilities across the spectrum. So it's not just about a technical solution, but it's thinking about the capabilities from a holistic point of view. So that includes organizational capabilities, process capabilities, traditional data management and governance capabilities, technical capabilities as well, analytic capabilities, and maybe even some more modern, more future-thinking capabilities. But to be able to map and understand the current levels of maturity is an important part of the methodology. In fact, one of the work products or deliverables that you'll find in the playbook is a matrix where you're able to then take the time to value as one axis and the ability to deliver and priority as another axis. So you can be able to map and understand how those capabilities fit to the business objectives and the business priorities, and then understand where you are in the maturity curve. And there's lots of maturity assessment tools out there that are best of class. So those are the first couple of steps. I'm going to share an example that we did with a manufacturing company in Europe where we went through this framework. It took us, I think, about 3.5 weeks end to end with a couple of resources on the ground to go through the discovery process in detail, to engage with the stakeholders, some virtually, some face-to-face, to collect and synthesize the information, to do the mapping to the patterns and to the capabilities, to assess the maturity, and to put together the action plan. And in this case, the manufacturing company was really struggling with financial planning and forecasting. I think in some ways this is perhaps a result of the supply chain issues that we've all heard about as consumers, or the challenges that we're having around COVID and accessibility of spare parts, et cetera. But this company was really struggling, not just with some of those slowdowns, but with their own processes internally. Very much manual, very much siloed, still doing planning on spreadsheets, in people's desks with information that was difficult to access, with lack of standardized information. I mean, you name it, they were cobbling together their financial and operational plans. and forecasting was just was not trustworthy within their organization. And so we sat with them and realized that this was a very high priority because of the financial impact. And so we broke down the processes. We started there to understand where those gaps were, and then we mapped that to the data capabilities and to understanding what their level of maturity was in their data program. Did they have good governance practices in place? Did they have metadata management practices to drive the transparency across the organization? How could we wean them off the Excels with some newer tools and a better UI, et cetera? And what we found was that it was a combination of revising existing data capabilities and maybe enhancing them with some new capabilities, and then some completely new solutions that they may not have thought of, but we at SAP bringing some accelerators to the table really helped them significantly. So for example, data cataloging, metadata management, data modeling became a high priority, and so we put those capabilities kind of front and center in the action plan, while at the same time, in parallel, building in some data fluency capabilities and creating an education program of those who are responsible for doing the planning work so they could understand where and how and why they should access certain data sets and where they could find trusted sources of information. And quite a lot of effort around taking their existing forecasting reports and adding and enhancing the visualization and bringing in more modern UIs, bringing in the ability to be able to do the forecasting in a way that was easier for the user community to understand and consume. So a real-world example, we ended up with an action plan that included some, as I said, some enhancements to existing capabilities and some brand new capabilities that added some value in an early insight way where they could use and leverage some pre-built content, some best practices for their industry, and some advice and guidance from SAP. So this three-step approach doesn't necessarily have to take a significant amount of time and effort. You are able to consider and focus on key opportunities that are going to drive outcomes based on a strategic plan or based on information that you know of the long-term vision for your organization. So you can start with some key components there. In my case, personally, I'm a big believer in data for sustainability, and so just about every organization out there has some sustainability objectives in their long-term action plan. So there's a place to start and maybe use this framework to reshape the data strategy to drive business outcomes towards sustainability. And understanding what are the new capabilities that you need to pursue a sustainability agenda, and what resources, what gaps do you have with the capabilities that you have today that perhaps need to be reshaped in order to drive that significant objective. And then, of course, to come up with an action plan that is centered around those business outcomes, starting with the earliest value opportunities up front and being able to understand the level of effort and prioritize that accordingly. So it's also all about insight to value and understanding, where those pockets of value are within the organization and putting that together into the action plan. And it's very much possible with some of these accelerators and business contexts that an organization like SAP and others offer today. So I want to talk a bit about the capabilities themselves. So this is really an important part of the methodology and understanding what are the capabilities that are needed to drive value across the organization. I've pulled out some of the kind of more modern capabilities that are associated with a data and analytics program, but not to say that this is by any means a checklist of all the capabilities that you need. It doesn't necessarily apply to every pattern, to every opportunity, to every business challenge. And there are quite a few additional foundational capabilities that we all know and love as data professionals that are tied to the organizational capabilities, the data process capabilities, et cetera. But I pulled these out because these are, the newer, more dynamic capabilities that you might not think about in a traditional model. So, and of course, you're getting input on these capabilities and level of maturity in the discovery phase in the framework. So these are really conversation starters, but also ways for you to then map the capabilities back to the priorities from the business and understand where you are in the maturity curve. So data fluency, this one is of course about bringing in data content in a business context. So being able to educate and drive fluency on the data topic across the organization. Doing this, in my opinion, is the best way is through the business champions that you've begun to develop a relationship with, by getting the right level of business support, and by embedding data fluency capabilities throughout the organization across all the stakeholders. The second one is around trusted data, and this, of course, is around having active governance and active programs and capabilities that ensure confidence in data and that there's high quality data processes and the traditional capabilities that we would consider around data quality, master data management, et cetera. Next is around data integration and access. And this might seem to be a bit on the technical side, but why this is important is because in the earlier part of the presentation, I shared some of the complexities that we see in today's data infrastructures, and that it's starting to become very complicated for users to get access to the right data that's fit for the business purpose. And so we should think about what capabilities do we now need for discovering data and profiling data and integrating data in a way in which enables data portability and getting data into the hands of the users in an easy and seamless way. So those capabilities are here. And then intelligent analytics, this is kind of at the heart of the insight piece. I think a lot of these capabilities are either existing today, such as reporting and dashboarding and so forth, but maybe to think of it from the lens of getting additional insights and making it more of a modern user interface in a way that makes it easier for the business to consume data and to get their analytic capabilities in a more self-serving, more modern, more easy-to-use way. And of course, there are modern technology stacks too that sit underneath this that offer solutions that are more tightly integrated and foster the data sharing across the organization. And then lastly, data science, to be able to have the capabilities to enable the citizen data science to explore and have access to the data that they need, and to enable with pre-built content so those data scientists can be highly productive at the start. So it's important to think about capabilities from a very holistic view. It's important, I think, to understand where and how those capabilities are going to drive value to the business priorities that you identified in that discovery phase, and to understand where you are in terms of maturity here, and that not all of these capabilities are going to apply, as I said, to each pattern, to each business challenge, but some are really foundational, right, and fundamental to being able to serve data up to the business for insights, for process automation, for efficiencies, for all of the value drivers that we know about. But there might be some new ones here that you might think about and consider if you're faced with a new business opportunity. As I mentioned with the examples there, maybe it's getting closer to your end consumer, or maybe it's a significant transformation that your organization is undertaking around process simplification, or maybe it's a significant technology strategy that you're having in your organization that's going to cause more complexity around data integration. So thinking of these capabilities from the lens of, how do they fit with the business priorities? And then where do we fit in terms of having a data program to deliver these capabilities back to the business? What resources do we need? What investments do we need to make? What changes do we need to make in terms of our approach, our team priorities, et cetera? I also think that one of the outcomes to the framework is to identify and map out the various levels of maturity here. I mentioned that before, that I think it's important to understand where those investment opportunities are. And I wanted to hear from you, from the audience there, in terms of where are you with the key capabilities in your organizations. I'm curious to hear where, if there are any patterns, commonalities of these capability gaps in your organization. So we've created a poll. So you can either go on to the WOVA app and answer the poll. I'll give you a couple of minutes to pull that up. I think we have some results that have already come in from attendees earlier today. Okay, well, let me see when they're ready. Okay, are you seeing answers come in, Maria?
68 answers.
Wow, okay.
You want to see them?
Yeah, I'm curious. I thought it might also be interesting for you to see where you fit within the others across the conference. Oh, it's about even, huh? Interesting that data fluency is the lowest there. Be interesting to hear how many of you have embarked on.
71, so a little bit.
All right, a few more, okay.
So we're fluent in finding out what else we're missing.
Exactly. Curious to hear how many of you have implemented some data literacy or some data fluency programs. Are you actively, no? That was your answer, okay. Curious.
We had a big discussion yesterday about the use of the term data literacy versus data fluency, and that stakeholders kind of don't like the literacy because it sort of implies illiteracy.
Yeah, it's
And
a negative.
fluency is becoming the better word.
Yeah.
Okay, Tina, are we done with this?
Yeah, we are. Thanks everybody for your input there. So I do think it's quite interesting to see and understand where we've invested in these capabilities. Where do we feel like we are today in terms of maturity, and where do we have room to grow and learn? I wanted to share a couple of key work products and deliverables that come out of the framework, because I think it'll help you understand how do you put the framework into practice. And so one of the tools that we use is a data strategy canvas. It's an output from the first step of discovery and prioritization. In fact, I sometimes will share with my team that they should start with a canvas and use this as a tool to shape the conversations that they're having with the business champions. Because ultimately you want to populate this canvas with all the insights and information that you've heard and learned from your conversations with the champions. So for example, I also like the fact that this is kind of a snapshot of what you've learned. It's easy to digest and easy to understand. So you start off with the business strategy and documenting and confirming your understanding of what the overarching business goals are, what is the business communicating to their stakeholders, and then defining and understanding those short-term priorities. So what are the next 1 year, 2 year, 5 year priorities to enable that strategy? I also really like the business process driving goals. So this is the conversation and the understanding of how's your business processes going to change based on that overarching strategy. I shared the examples of companies that are aiming to get closer to their end consumers. So their processes are going to be totally transformed, new processes for how they engage and interact with those end consumers, just as an example. So it would be interesting to see and understand that out of this discovery phase, which of the processes are going to be different in the future, and how's that transformation plan going to work, and what are the data capabilities that are needed to support that. The data strategy requirements, this is the heart of it, to be able to articulate what is needed to be changed. Is there new policies that need to be created, new programs that need to be launched, revised capabilities that you may have had in place, new audiences, new stakeholders to engage with. All these different requirements can be very easily articulated here. The critical data, so the data products that will materially impact those business priorities. Either data products that exist today or data products that are completely new that need to be sourced in different ways, maybe purchased, maybe acquired, rented, et cetera. Having a clear understanding of what the to-be data landscape and critical data elements are going to be required to drive the transformation or to drive the strategy forward. The accountability model and the KPIs and the risk, to me, all go very closely hand in hand. The risks of what are the process risks, what are the culture risks, what are the data quality risks, who's going to be held accountable for ensuring that the data strategy is enabled, that the organizational roles are required, super important. I would add to this too as well, it's not on the canvas, but I also like to have a place to articulate the funding requirements. So I think it's super important to be able to understand and articulate the funding that's needed. So even before you get to the action plan, to be able to then summarize what is it going to take for us to enable this strategy, and then the KPIs. So how are we going to measure our success? And I get this question asked so very often. What are the critical KPIs that you would recommend? Do you have them, in a one-page format that you can give to me? And yes, of course, we're happy to share and be transparent around what we've learned in working with various companies and various industries around how they measure the success. Another thing that I really like about this canvas is that this is a communication vehicle. This is a tool that you can use to excerpt key messages that can be shared with the executive audience. Here's the format, the agenda for the executive presentation that you want to give as a data leader that summarizes all the work that you've done in the strategy in a way that will resonate with those executives, that they can actually get their buy-in and input. I did this work with a company a couple of years ago, and they loved this canvas so much that when I shared it with the business champions, I said, well, did we capture everything the way that you intended to? Are we on the right path? Are we ready to deliver value? Do we have the right priorities? And they were like, yeah. And I said, well, would you mind giving us your initials in the top corner so that we could have this, in case things change down the road? And they did. And they actually gave us, virtual initials on this document to show their buy-in, right? To demonstrate their support and to be active champions, not just to be those that, wanted to give us their point of view, but to make that level of commitment, I think, was really important to their success. So there's an example of this canvas in the playbook, and you can take one of the USB sticks or stop by our SAP booth to get a copy of the details. But I think this is a really valuable tool as an output from the framework. Another tool or another output is around the Fast Path Action Plan. And we call it Fast Path because the intention is to have a prioritized plan based on accelerated time to value, that there's quick wins, that there are key enablers that are in the early phase of the action plan. And you're actually, if you think of it, you're building this action plan as you go through the methodology. as you're revising and adapting and creating the data strategy, you're actually building the plan as you go. So there shouldn't be a long exercise that takes a significant amount of time at the very tail end. You're building ideas and generating input into the action plan through the outcomes of your discovery sessions, through your capabilities mapping, your pattern assignments. It all comes together in the canvas and then ultimately the plan that articulates how you're going to get there. I also think that this is the time to start solutioning. So this is when you can start thinking about what are the needs, what are the requirements, whether they be tools, resources, new approaches, changes in processes. You do your solutioning at this stage, and you start to articulate a time box around those solutions. I think that's a critical success factor here. So you can see that there are steps here. I would share that in many cases, the capabilities themselves might be in place. They just might be a little bit on the low scale. So think about things that can be done and put into the action plan. They're going to deliver additional value with limited time and costs and effort. So for example, I mentioned dashboarding and being able to deliver additional analytic capabilities could be something that's done as simply as changing the UI. And that can be a fast path to value that allows more people to engage with the analytic tools because you're making it easier for them to consume. Could also be that you have in the early stages the launch of a data fluency program or the kickoff of a change management plan around data capabilities, around data modeling, data asset management, data product management. I don't think that in the action plan that it should be linear where one thing's after the other, right? That you'll have activities and insights that happen in parallel so that you can demonstrate value early and often. I do think, though, it's important to have milestones in the plan where you can demonstrate that you'll start to see value. Otherwise, you're just kind of working the plan and nobody's keeping track of when there's value delivered back to the business, right? And just like the strategy canvas, this action plan should be signed off and agreed upon by those business champions, by the executives who are going to step up. Funding can be a part of the action plan as well, where you're asking for resources to be able to deliver the priorities. And I think that you should take advantage of as much pre-built solutioning as you possibly can. There are opportunities to drive change and bring value that can be done in ways that are accelerated, right? That are for pre-built solutions, business context through applications, and through the support of the champions who can help you in terms of understanding what resources do they have that they can bring to the table to help to accelerate the time to value. So like the canvas, there's an example of the action plan as well in the playbook that we'll provide afterward. All right, so last but not least, I mentioned that there's this master class that we created that goes into this in a lot more detail. There's a playbook that's available that shows these different examples and goes into the steps again in a lot more content than I could cover in the time that we had today. But I hope that you got some nuggets, and I hope that you've gotten some ideas of how you can either create a new data strategy, revise an existing data strategy. As a reminder, it's all about prioritization and gaining business stakeholder buy-in, building in the capabilities as part of a detailed plan of action, but with value in mind. So you have that fast path up front, and understanding where you can leverage accelerators and pre-built content as much as you can. All right, we'll take questions, Maria.
Okay, great.
Yeah?
All right,
Hopefully
everybody.
you have some, yeah?
Yep. Well, by the way, there was over 100 people attending your session, Tina. So
That's excellent.
Yep, that's great. So we had 4 questions on, well, first let's just open it up to the audience here
Yeah.
in the room. Are there any questions for Tina? If you have a question, please use the mic so that everybody can hear you. Yes?
Do we give him the mic?
It would be better if, yeah, there.
Oh.
That would be the easy mic, yes.
Sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, just help me understand. So essentially, what you're proposing, like, is very similar to, building and offering any other solution, not necessarily database solution, right? So is there any fundamental difference in this approach? I mean, I'm talking the buy-in, the focusing on the value, etc. So what is really the difference, or maybe there's no difference in the approach in the context of data versus any other type of solution, any other type of capability?
Yeah, I think that the key part of the framework that makes it specific and different to data and analytics is around the capabilities themselves, is that you're focusing on, these are the analytic insight patterns that the organization is clamoring for, that they're asking for, they're looking for insight on. And then these are the capabilities that are specific to data and analytics that are going to enable those requirements or those patterns. And so, yes, it's a fairly standard framework, but what makes it different are those capabilities. So being able to map those capabilities to say, okay, if the business wants to completely transform itself and go into a new marketplace with selling new products, for example, then what are the data capabilities needed? Do I have in place the right data? Do I have access to it? Do I have the right level of security capabilities in place? Is the infrastructure there to be able to ingest that data? Can that data be easily consumed by the users that are looking for it for insights? And so being able to tie it back to data and analytic capabilities is what makes it unique. I would also offer that there are accelerators and pre-built content that are focused on what we've learned at SAP in terms of common patterns, common capabilities that we see from various companies across various industries that come with the framework. And so that in and of itself gives you a leg up, right? Gives you an opportunity to accelerate the work.
Tina, if I could add also, by the way, we had a session yesterday, a smaller session that ran for a few hours on this methodology. And I think one of the other differentiators also is that that pattern to capability mapping that's already kind of predefined, right? So we've seen many different kinds of patterns. So if you have a pattern that's an operational performance pattern, it comes with these sets of major capabilities. So you don't have to kind of rethink from a blank sheet of paper. So certainly I think the discovery process, everybody does discovery processes and prioritization, but then it's how do you take all that and assimilate it into a set of patterns that are repeatable and a set of capabilities sort of that you can say, you don't have to start with a blank sheet of paper, and that's what it gives the agility for. And I think the other point was that, a lot of times we hear, well, we can't do this kind of analytic or insight because the data's bad. And so we can't do it, so we need to go fix the data first, and then we can do the analytics. And this is pretty much offering to say, do them both, right? Scope them both together and do the foundational with the analytics. That's the way to do agility. It's agile because it's focused, right? It's not all pieces of data. It's the data capabilities that make sense for the analytics that make sense and the outcomes that make sense. That's what gives you speed. It's not trying to fix it all.
Yeah, the same thing with data fluency.
Yeah.
So you build in data fluency as a part of the various programs and activities. So as you're building out a new technology platform, build in data fluency into that work effort so that it's seamless and so that you're not doing one before the other, but you're taking advantage of the opportunity to scale and to say, okay, great. And besides which, you have the opportunity for getting funding and for getting business buy-in and support by tagging along to those larger transformation projects, but with a data and analytics work stream specific to the capabilities that are needed. around data and analytics. Data fluency to me is that's a no-brainer. That should be put into every single project. And so you're going to build capabilities around data fluency throughout the action plan, right? It's going to be a continuous level of effort.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I'm going to try, there's one simple question, and I really should know the answer to this, but I don't. Is there a way for remote attendees to get a copy of the documents? I don't think we post presentations on the Whova platform. We do make the recordings available for many months.
But the master class,
But
that's the best way.
yes, but those that are remote can't get it.
They can access it on the,
Yes, yeah, so for the remote, hopefully you can hear that, yes, you can get the master class, which is right there on the slide, plus the SAP virtual booth has also those assets available for the virtual audience.
I'm happy to as well. Here's my email and LinkedIn. I'm happy to share a copy of the slides upon request. They're not available through the MIT group. We can do it individually.
So this next question is a very SAP specific, and neither you nor I wrote that question, so we know it didn't come from us. How is the new S4 offerings from SAP helping to standardize data elements, and does this feed into the fast track to Agile DNA, i.e. fewer custom Z codes?
Yeah, absolutely. No. I know that that within the new S/4HANA solution set, there is a new data model that's much more simplified, that's written much more in the lens of a business content, and the opportunity completely exists when you move from a traditional SAP ECC or ERP, when you move to the more modern S/4HANA solution, that it's a chance for you to take a look at all the custom coding and to return back to standards. Many of the customers that I work with are doing just that, redesigning their semantic model based on the SAP standards, stripping out Z codes that had been created over the years, and again, going back to a more simple, more complex, less complex data model, data table set. Completely different, I will say, in S4, so requires a bit of effort to understand it and to adapt to it.
Then you had two other questions which you have already answered online, so I don't know if you want to repeat those answers, but you certainly, before the session, did share that.
Yeah, I think there was a question around, what's Agile and what does it mean in terms of, it's not the Agile, right? It's Agile for data. It's the Agile way of approaching a data strategy that, doesn't take months or years, but really looks at it from the lens of business priorities and from engaging with various stakeholders and putting the ideas in a format that's easily consumed by the business, like the data strategy canvas, for example, that doesn't necessarily require a 30-page, PowerPoint deck or, a large document that might sit on the shelf, but that can be easily created within a matter of weeks and that can be adapted to changes in the business environment. That's the idea, is that it can be repeatable and will include, quick wins, easy ways to generate value that resonates with the business.
Good. Yes. Question from the audience. You could go to the microphone. Okay, I'll repeat the question then.
So I have a question. So one of the key tenets of your presentation is applying data capabilities to value. I typically struggle, and I think a lot of organizations struggle applying the foundational capabilities like metadata management, for example, to a business value outcome. There's a bit of a lead to say, sort of my customer is better because I have a good data catalog. And the other complication is that the project that is supposed to, or the initiative that's supposed to create that catalog is most frequently not going to get the benefit for the successor, somebody So how do you overcome that problem? How do you convey the value and kind of keep business into spending the money, allocating the resources to those things that don't necessarily manifest how you see it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there are struggles with metadata and data cataloging. The business doesn't see that as being valuable. That's not going to accelerate their business priorities necessarily. But there are going to be foundational investment requirements that just make a lot of good sense, either from an IT perspective with an IT champion who recognizes, I talked about common semantics and having, the ability to be able to articulate the meaning of the data. I think the value comes in how you approach a data catalog or metadata, and doing so in a way that focuses on business terms and not just technical terms, not just having the documentation around what system the data resides in, but why is it useful, who's the key stakeholder, who the key processes that consume that data, and what are the data quality KPIs, and using the catalog as a vehicle to measure and monitor the quality of the data, and to be able to articulate what that data's purpose is back to the business, and putting that into the data catalog so that it's searchable for the business and in a way that is easy for the business consumer to understand and use. It's a bit of a stretch, though, to say that the business consumer will ever access the data catalog, frankly. It's really more for the data team, for the IT team, and it's part of the foundational capabilities and requirements. I do think that there's the capabilities for data discovery, which I really like, that adds additional value, and that's bringing insight into how the data flows across the various processes and systems. We did that with one customer whose eyes were opened when they saw that the data touched all these various platforms and systems, and it gave them the sense of understanding where the quality gaps could be, because the data, as it transversed throughout the enterprise and throughout these various systems, there were gaps in governance and gaps in data quality, and that was a very useful exercise. So I really believe in data discovery as a key capability, and then that fed as input into the data catalog, because what we learned in doing the discovery work, we then put into the catalog to be able to track and articulate and to resolve some of those governance and quality gaps that we learned of.
Great. So thank you, Tina. This is Tina's contact information if you would like to get a hold of her. It's always great seeing you, Tina.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for having me.